years had passed since Ifia and Chaik had started their new life together. Their home had grown into a place of love, laughter, and dreams of the future. The couple had enjoyed their time together, working, building their careers, and making plans for the family they wanted to create. But as time passed, there was always one thing they both longed for: a child. Ifia had always dreamed of becoming a mother. She could picture it clearly, holding her baby in her arms, watching them grow, feeling the joy and responsibility of nurturing life. Chaik too shared this dream. They had both talked about it many times, but when the news didn't come as quickly as they'd hoped, they hadn't let it affect them. They stayed positive, focusing on their careers and their relationship, trusting that when the time was right, it would happen. And then one morning, Ifia woke up to a feeling she hadn't had before. She had been feeling a little different over the past few weeks, tired, a little nauseous at times, but she chalked it up to stress and the daily grind of life. She took a deep breath and walked to the bathroom, the small pregnancy test resting in her hand. She had taken tests before, all coming back negative, but this time felt different. With trembling hands, she followed the instructions, her heart racing as the test processed. The wait felt like an eternity, but then the result appeared. Her eyes widened and she gasped. Positive. Overwhelmed with joy, Ifia covered her mouth in disbelief. She was pregnant. Quickly, she rushed to the kitchen where Chaik was having his morning coffee. He looked up at her with a smile, but when he saw her face, the joy in her eyes, he immediately knew something was up. Ifia? Chaik asked, standing up from his seat, his face full of concern. What's wrong? Ifia couldn't help it. She ran to him, unable to contain her excitement, and before he could say another word, she hugged him tightly. Chaik, I'm pregnant! She exclaimed, her voice full of emotion. Chaik froze for a moment, disbelief written all over his face, and then it hit him. His eyes lit up and a huge grin spread across his face. Are you serious? Really? He asked, his voice filled with joy. Ifia laughed, nodding. Yes, I'm pregnant. I just found out. Chaik picked her up in his arms, spinning her around in a circle, laughter filling the room. This is amazing. We're going to be parents, Ifia. We're going to have a family. Tears of happiness welled up in Ifia's eyes as she hugged him back tightly. I'm so happy, Chaik, Ifia whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. I've been dreaming of this day for so long, and now it's finally happening. We're going to have a baby. Chaik smiled, his face glowing with happiness. This is the best news ever. We're going to make amazing parents, Ifia. I can't wait to meet our little one. They held each other for a long moment, feeling the weight of their joy. 3 months had passed since Ifia discovered she was pregnant, and life had been blissful. She and Chaik had begun planning for their future, making preparations for the baby's arrival, and turning the spare room into the nursery they had always dreamed of. The room, once just a quiet space, was now filled with soft colors, baby furniture, and the kind of hope only parents-to-be could understand. Ifia was already imagining what it would be like to hear the sound of little feet running through the house, to hold her baby in her arms, to experience motherhood. But one night, when the world outside was still, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the night breeze, Ifia woke up suddenly. It wasn't the usual light sleep she was accustomed to during her pregnancy. It was the sound. A strange sound. At first, she thought it was just a dream, the kind of half-wakefulness that comes with deep sleep. But as she lay there in the dark, the noise grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from the spare room, the room they had decided would be the baby's room. The room that was still filled with unpacked gifts, paint cans, and soft toys waiting for the little one. Ifia's heart began to race, her senses heightened by the sudden disturbance. The sound was soft, melodic, almost like a lullaby, but it was wrong. It was that same eerie tune, the one that had come from the music box with the strange baby doll inside it. The same music box that had unsettled her the day they received it. She slowly slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Chaik, and crept quietly through the dark hallway toward the nursery. The closer she got, the more the unsettling melody filled the space around her, vibrating through the walls, almost like it was alive. Her hand gripped the doorknob, and with a deep breath, she turned it and stepped inside the room. There it was. The music box, sitting on the shelf in the far corner of the room, was open. The tiny, lifelike baby doll, now with its pacifier out of its mouth, was positioned unnaturally in the box, its eyes wide and staring. And the lullaby, that same strange, haunting tune, was playing softly, almost like it was calling to her. Ifia stood frozen at the door for a moment, staring at the box. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Ifia walked toward the box. The soft sound of the music seemed to press in on her, filling her ears as she reached out to close it. She could feel a strange chill in the air, the kind that comes with a heavy, unspoken presence. But she quickly pushed the thoughts from her mind, reminding herself that this was just a silly, unwanted gift. A weird joke, nothing more. With shaking hands, Ifia closed the lid of the music box. The lullaby stopped abruptly, and a sudden silence flooded the room. She stood there for a moment, feeling the tension in the air release slightly, but the unease still lingered, like an invisible weight. Her mind raced as she looked at the doll, its lifeless gaze still fixated on her. Something about the way it felt made her skin crawl. Shaking her head, she told herself it was just her imagination running wild, the stress of pregnancy and all the changes in her life causing her to be more sensitive than usual. She turned and left the room, shutting the door quietly behind her. As she returned to bed, the weight of what had just happened hung over her, but she tried to push it aside. She climbed back into bed beside Chaik, who was still peacefully asleep, and pulled the covers up to her chin. The next morning, Ifia and Chaik sat together on the couch, enjoying a rare quiet morning. The television flickered in the background, but neither of them was paying much attention. Ifia rested her hand on her stomach, a gentle smile on her face as she thought about the future. She had been feeling more and more connected to the baby with each passing day, imagining what it would be like to hold their child in her arms. But then, just as they were getting comfortable, a sharp pain shot through Ifia's abdomen, causing her to gasp and stiffen. "Ifia?" Chaik asked, his voice laced with concern. "What's wrong?" Ifia's face contorted with the sudden intense pain. It felt like something had snapped inside her, a sharp stabbing ache that made her catch her breath. She tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just the normal discomfort that came with pregnancy. But then the pain intensified, and she felt a sudden wetness between her legs. Her heart raced and panic flooded her chest as she looked down at her clothes. Blood. It was all too much, too sudden, too overwhelming. The reality hit her like a ton of bricks. "Chaik!" she screamed, her voice trembling as she grabbed his arm, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Something's wrong. There's blood. We need to go to the hospital." Chaik's face went pale. Without saying another word, he scooped Ifia into his arms, rushing her to the car. His hand shook as he fumbled with the keys, his mind a blur of fear and confusion. He couldn't process it. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing. He couldn't lose her. Not now, not when they had just started building their future. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity, the sharp pangs of Ifia's pain and the sight of the blood making everything seem surreal. Chaik tried to reassure her, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He was holding it together for her, but inside he was falling apart. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctors rushed Ifia into the emergency room. Chaik stood outside, pacing, his mind spiraling into a frenzy. He couldn't focus on anything but the thought that something might happen to her, to the baby. This was supposed to be the happiest time of their lives, and now it felt like their world was falling apart. After what seemed like hours, the doctor finally emerged, his face solemn. "Mr. Chaik, I'm afraid we have some difficult news," the doctor said gently. "We've done all we can, but it seems that you and your wife have lost the baby. I'm so sorry." The words hit Chaik like a punch to the gut. He stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to comprehend what the doctor was saying. It was as if the room had suddenly gone quiet, as though the air itself had been sucked out of him. His knees went weak, and he had to steady himself on the wall. Ifia, lying in the bed behind him, had heard it too. The devastation in her heart mirrored what she saw in Chaik's eyes. The tears came in an instant, hot and heavy, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. She had felt the baby growing inside her, had imagined their future together. Now everything had been taken away in a single devastating moment. Chaik rushed to her side, holding her tightly as she cried. His own tears welled up, his heart breaking for her, for both of them. The dreams they had shared, the visions of a family, felt like they had been ripped away. "I'm so sorry, Ifia," he whispered through his tears. I'm so sorry. Ifia clung to him, her sobs shaking her body. She didn't know how to explain the emptiness she felt. The loss was too big, too painful. She had never imagined that something so heartbreaking could happen to her. The doctors and nurses gave them space, allowing them a few moments of privacy, but nothing could take away the pain they both felt. In the days following the devastating news, Ifia's world seemed to come to a standstill. She couldn't bring herself to speak much, nor did she have the energy to eat. The once vibrant woman who had dreamt of motherhood now felt empty, like a hollow shell. The pain of losing the baby was overwhelming, and no matter how much Chaik tried to comfort her, she couldn't escape the sadness that seemed to cling to her. It wasn't long before Amma, Ifia's mother, along with Nia and Zara, arrived at their home to offer support. They knew how hard it was for Ifia to go through such a loss, and even though words couldn't take away the pain, they wanted to be there for her. Amma stepped into the house, her heart aching at the sight of her daughter. Ifia was lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, her face pale and tear-streaked. Amma's heart ached for her. She could see the weight of the grief in her eyes. Without saying much, Amma sat beside her, gently brushing Ifia's hair away from her face. "Sweetheart," Amma said softly, her voice full of concern. "I'm so sorry, darling. I wish I could take this pain away for you." Ifia barely responded, her lips trembling as she fought back more tears. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I feel so empty." Amma reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to do anything right now. You don't have to be strong. Just take it one day at a time. We're all here for you." Nia, Zara, and Chaik watched quietly from the doorway. Zara stepped forward, her voice soft and comforting. "Ifia, we're here for you. We love you, and we'll get through this together, okay?" But Ifia couldn't bring herself to respond. She just closed her eyes and let the silence fill the room, her grief too heavy to bear. For the next few days, she hardly ate or spoke. It was as though she had lost her ability to connect with the world around her, and her sadness seemed to hang like a cloud over the house. Chaik, torn between wanting to be there for his wife and the responsibilities of his job, left for work after a few days. He kissed Ifia on the forehead before he left, but he could see that she wasn't ready to face the world yet. Her silence, her stillness, broke him inside, but he knew she needed time to heal. Amma, understanding that her daughter needed extra care, decided to stay with Ifia while Chaik was at work. For the next week, Amma took over everything, making sure Ifia drank water, cooked small meals that Ifia could barely touch, and sat beside her when she couldn't sleep. Amma kept the house quiet and peaceful, not pushing Ifia to speak or do anything she wasn't ready for. Each morning, Amma would sit with Ifia by the window, sometimes talking softly, sometimes just sitting in silence, letting her daughter process the pain in her own way. She knew grief had its own timeline, and she wasn't going to rush Ifia through it. Finally, one day, Ifia stood up, walked to the bathroom, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked different, tired, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there in a while. She felt an overwhelming sense of loss, yes, but also a sense of determination. She wasn't going to let this tragedy define her. Later that day, when Chaik came home from work, he found her sitting at the dining table, a small plate of food in front of her. She was eating finally, with a small but genuine smile on her face. "Ifia," Chaik said softly, sitting down beside her. "How are you feeling?" Ifia looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I'm getting better, Chaik. Slowly. It's not easy, but I'm starting to feel like myself again. Thank you for being patient with me." Chaik smiled, his eyes filled with relief. He knew the road to healing wouldn't be fast, but seeing her take small steps toward recovery gave him hope. "I'll always be here for you, Ifia. We'll get through this together." A few days later, Ifia returned to work, though she still carried the sadness with her. She wasn't fully healed, and perhaps she never would be, but she was moving forward. She was learning how to live with the loss, to honor the memory of the baby they had lost, and to embrace the love and support of the people who cared for her. Over the next 5 years, the cycle repeated itself. Ifia would fall pregnant, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. The joy of seeing 2 pink lines on a test, the excitement of telling Chaik, the hopeful anticipation. They were always filled with dreams of a new beginning. But as soon as they allowed themselves to feel that hope, the same heartbreak would strike again. Each time, Ifya would lose the baby. The grief would crash down on them both, a wave that seemed to drown their spirits. Chaik would hold her, whispering words of comfort, but there were no words that could take away the pain. The dreams of parenthood that they had once held so tightly slipped further and further out of reach. Ifya tried to stay strong, but the repeated losses wore her down. She'd been to doctors, tried different treatments, taken supplements, and done everything she could to hold on to hope. But each time it ended in heartbreak. By the time 7 years had passed, Ifya and Chaik had no child to show for all the dreams they had shared. The house that had once been filled with the promise of a baby's laughter was now eerily quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the quiet hum of their daily routine. The nursery they had once prepared with so much love stood empty, a room filled with memories of a future that never came. Chaik too had changed. He was still the loving husband, still the man who did everything he could to support Ifya. But the weight of the constant loss had taken its toll. He had become more distant at times, not because he didn't love Ifya, but because he didn't know how to fix the pain. There were days when he wanted to pull away, to stop trying, to protect himself from the hurt that was becoming too much to bear. But he couldn't. He couldn't stop loving her, even if the idea of a child seemed further away with each passing year. 7 years of trying, 7 years of disappointment, and still no child. At times, Ifya wondered if the universe had forgotten about her. She watched as friends and family around her had children, as the world moved forward with life, while she stood still in a painful limbo. Every pregnancy announcement, every baby shower invite, felt like a knife to the heart. She would smile, congratulate, and share in the joy of others, but inside, she felt a deep emptiness that no amount of time or effort could fill. The next week, Ifya was reluctant but agreed to visit the pastor with her mother. She had always believed in God, but after so many disappointments and losses, her faith had begun to waver. The idea of going through another prayer ritual seemed almost too much to bear. But seeing how much her mother believed, and how desperate she was for her, Ifya agreed to join. For 7 days, Ifya and Amma embarked on a strict prayer and fasting regimen, with the pastor guiding them through each step. The fast was difficult for Ifya, both physically and emotionally. She felt the hunger pangs gnawing at her, but it was the spiritual battle she found the hardest to endure. Each day, they prayed for healing, for divine intervention, and for a child to bless their home. On the final day of their 7-day fast, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The pastor had arranged for a prayer meeting at Ifya and Chaik's house. The pastor led them in intense prayer, raising powerful, fervent points, asking for God's mercy and healing. His voice reverberated through the house as he called upon divine strength, and Ifya's heart, which had been heavy for so long, began to feel a shift. She couldn't explain it, but the room felt charged with something beyond their understanding. As the prayer intensified, the pastor paused abruptly, his eyes widening as if he were seeing something beyond the physical realm. He stood still for a moment, scanning the room, before his gaze fixed on something in the corner. "The Lord has shown me something," the pastor declared, his voice serious. "There is something in this house that is blocking your blessings. A spiritual tie that has been hidden. It must be dealt with." Everyone fell silent, waiting for him to elaborate. The pastor continued, his gaze now directed toward the shelf where the strange music box still sat, the one Ifya had kept in the spare room, the gift that had never fully been discarded, the one that had unsettled her so many times. "There," the pastor said, pointing. "The strange gift, wrapped in a box with the baby doll inside. That is what the Lord is showing me. This gift must be destroyed." The pastor's voice grew stronger. "Bring it to me. Now." A chill ran down Ifya's spine as she walked toward the shelf and took the box. She hesitated for a moment before handing it over to the pastor. As soon as he held it in his hands, the room seemed to grow stiller, the air thickening with an unseen energy. The pastor began to pray aloud, his voice powerful as he rebuked the spirits he believed were attached to the object. He raised his hands high, speaking in tongues as the intensity of the moment reached its peak. The room was filled with an overwhelming sense of urgency, as if the very foundation of their lives was being shaken. Finally, the pastor spoke, his voice clear and commanding. "We must burn it." He handed the box to one of the praying team member, who took it outside. Under the pastor's direction, they set the box alight, watching as the flames devoured it. The moment the box was reduced to ashes, the pastor continued his prayer, asking for divine protection, healing, and for God to release the blessings that had been held back. Days after the intense prayer session, Ifya felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She was beginning to feel the weight of her losses lift, and she allowed herself to hope for the first time in a long while. But that fragile calm was shattered when an urgent call came one afternoon. "Ifya, you need to come to the hospital." "Zara, something's happened." Her mother's voice trembled on the other end. Ifya's heart skipped a beat. "Zara." The call was brief, but it was enough to send a wave of panic through her. Without a word, she rushed to Chaik, who was in the middle of a phone call. "We need to go to the hospital," she said urgently. "It's Zara." Chaik didn't ask questions. He saw the fear in her eyes and grabbed his keys. Together, they rushed out of the house, the drive to the hospital feeling like an eternity. Ifya's mind raced. What could have happened to Zara? Why hadn't she called herself? Why had it been her mother? When they arrived at the hospital, the sight before them was more shocking than Ifya could have ever prepared for. Zara lay unconscious on the bed, her body covered in burns. The smell of scorched skin lingered in the room, and her once beautiful face was barely recognizable. Ifya's breath caught in her throat as she saw the extent of the damage, her legs going weak beneath her. Nia stood by the bed, her face contorted in grief, tears streaming down her face. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her voice broken as she muttered over and over, "I never meant for this. I never meant for any of this." Ifya rushed to her sister's side, clutching Zara's hand, but her heart pounded with confusion and fear. "Aunt Nia, what happened?" Nia collapsed to her knees beside the bed, her hands clutching her face in desperation. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't mean it. I didn't think it would work. I didn't think it would hurt anyone." Ifya's pulse quickened as she looked at her Aunt Nia, the realization dawning on her. "What are you talking about?" Nia's confession came out in broken sobs, each word like a knife to Ifya's heart. "I went to a witch doctor. I was jealous, Ifya. I couldn't stand it. You got married before Zara, and I watched you have everything I'd ever dreamed of, and I couldn't take it. I couldn't stand that you were happy, that you had everything you wanted. And so, I made sure it wouldn't happen for you. I made sure you would never have a child. I did this to you. I gifted you the strange-looking coffin-like music box with the baby doll in it. It was the only wedding gift I got you, in fact. The witch doctor promised me that as long as you had opened the gift, that every night once you turned 3 months pregnant you would lose the child, and that the cry of a baby will never be heard from your home. She also warned that the gift must never go near fire, else I will be childless forever. I didn't know this would be the end for my daughter Zara. I was so blinded by my jealousy," she cried. Ifya's mind reeled as she tried to process her aunt's confession. The pain of it felt like an electric shock running through her veins. Her own aunt? Amma, who had been standing by the doorway, watching helplessly, walked into the room. Her face was pale, and there were no words in her mouth as she approached her sister, Nia. Amma's eyes were filled with tears. Tears not just for Zara, but for the betrayal, the revelation of what her own sister had done to Ifya. "Nia," Amma whispered, her voice breaking as she stood beside her. "How could you do this? How could you hurt us like this? How could you hurt my own daughter like this?" Amma's voice cracked with the weight of her grief, her disappointment, and her disbelief. Nia could only sob, her body racked with guilt and sorrow. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Amma. I don't know what came over me. I was consumed with jealousy, with bitterness, and I did something terrible." Zara, who had been silent throughout the chaos, now breathed shallowly on the hospital bed. But it was clear that her time was running out. Despite the doctor's best efforts, it was too late. The burns were severe, and the damage was irreversible. Zara slipped away quietly, her life fading in front of them, her body scarred not only by the physical burns but by the deep betrayal that had led to her tragic end. When it was all over and Zara was buried, the family was fractured beyond repair. Nia had no words of apology left. She was drowning in her guilt and grief. But Amma, shattered by the loss of her niece and her sister's betrayal, made a decision. She couldn't allow Nia to be around Ifya anymore. Not after what had happened. Amma turned to Nia, her voice cold with pain. "You will not come near my daughter again. You have destroyed everything we had, and now you will face the consequences of your actions. I can never forgive you for what you've done." Nia stood alone in her grief, unable to understand the depth of the loss she had caused, both of her daughter's happiness and the bond with her own sister. A year passed, and Ifia's life slowly began to heal. Despite the devastating loss of Zara and the betrayal by Nia, life continued. And then one fateful day, Ifia received the news she had dreamed of for years. She was pregnant again. And this time it was different. This time, the miracle they had longed for was finally happening. Ifia and Chaik embraced the news with joy, cautiously hopeful this time. And then a few months later, Ifia gave birth to twin boys. Two healthy, beautiful boys who would fill their home with the laughter and joy that had been absent for so long. Ifia held her sons in her arms, tears of gratitude in her eyes as she whispered, "We finally have our family." The title of this story, "Why You Should Receive Cash Gifts Only at Your Wedding," speaks volumes about the importance of being cautious with the gifts and energies we invite into our lives. Sometimes the things we receive, whether in material or spiritual form, can carry unintended consequences. A seemingly innocent gift can harbor hidden motives, jealousy, and even destructive energy, as seen with the strange music box gifted by Aunt Nia that impacted Ifia's life. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Let me know what you think of the story and the lessons it taught. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay tuned for more, and remember, sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the things we least expect.